My father raised his right hand and swore to tell the truth. Then he looked at me and lied. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Fluorescent light overhead, the kind that hums just below the threshold of hearing. Wood paneling on the walls that might have been impressive once, before it warped and dulled to the color of old tobacco. I had stood before military tribunals. I had argued in front of judges who wore medals under their robes and carried the weight of command in their posture. This was a county probate courtroom in Annapolis, Maryland, on a Tuesday. I sat at the table on the left side of the room. No attorney beside me. One legal pad, one pen, a bottle of water I hadn't opened. My father sat in the witness stand in a charcoal suit I didn't recognize. He was 74 now. His hair had gone fully white. He held himself like a man who had spent decades being right about things and expected to be right about this too. Daniel, my younger brother, sat at the table across from me with his attorney. The attorney's name was Garrett Bloom, perhaps 55, with the specific kind of confidence that comes from winning cases against people who couldn't afford to fight back. He had not looked at me once since I'd entered the room. That was deliberate. I had been in rooms like this, not this room, but rooms with this energy, since I was 23 years old. I knew what it felt like when someone had decided the outcome before the proceeding began. My father cleared his throat. Bloom asked him, in a gentle voice that had clearly been rehearsed, to describe the relationship between his late wife Grace and each of his 2 children in the final year of her life. Franklin Mercer nodded slowly, as though the question deserved careful thought. Daniel was very present, he said. He visited. He called. He helped with the practical things, the medical appointments, the paperwork. He paused. Catherine. He looked at me. Not with cruelty. That was the part I hadn't expected, even now. He looked at me the way people look at a room in a house they've decided not to keep. Assessing. Already past it. Catherine was not close to her mother, he said. Not in any meaningful way. She chose a different life. She was gone. For most of it, she was simply gone. I think Grace accepted that. But close? He shook his head. No. The court reporter's fingers moved across her keys. I did not look up from my legal pad. I had written one word at the top of the page 10 minutes before the proceeding started. I looked at it now. The same word I had written at the top of every difficult brief for 30 years. Forward. I noticed the court clerk glance at my sign-in sheet when she'd handed back my ID that morning. She looked at it, then looked at me, just once, and said nothing. Just returned the card and moved on to the next item on her desk. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. My mother commissioned as an ensign the year I was born. I know that because she told me, not as sentiment, but as fact. She sat across from me at our kitchen table when I was 9 years old and told me the way she told me most important things. Simply, without decoration, as though the information deserved to be received cleanly. I raised my right hand in 1977, she said. You were 7 months old. Were you scared? I asked. She considered the question with the same expression she gave to all questions worth answering. I was precise, she said. I enlisted at 18. Not because my mother pushed me, she never pushed. She simply never suggested there was a ceiling. That was enough. I spent 4 years as an enlisted sailor before I understood, with the specific clarity that only comes from being inside a thing, that the law was where I needed to be. Not because I wanted power. I had seen enough of what power does when it goes untethered. Because I believed that precision and fairness belonged together. And most institutions kept them in separate rooms and hoped they'd never meet. I earned my undergraduate degree at night, between deployments. Took the LSAT on a base in Virginia, in a room that smelled like diesel and industrial cleaner, sitting next to a gunnery sergeant who was applying to dental school. We didn't speak. We sat in the same plastic chairs under the same humming lights and filled in the same answer bubbles. Two people who had decided separately that the next thing required more than the last thing had given them. I received my commission in the Judge Advocate General's Corps at 26. 30 years. 30 years of courts-martial, administrative hearings, watching people in rooms exactly like this one try to use language to reshape what actually happened. I had seen defendants crumble under their own testimony. I had seen witnesses lie so skillfully they convinced themselves. I had seen attorneys like Garrett Bloom, polished, prepared, certain, walk into proceedings they had already decided they'd won. The outcome they imagined and the outcome that arrived were rarely the same thing. I sat now in a county probate courtroom in Annapolis, representing myself, because there was no attorney I trusted with this particular case, not because I doubted them. Because I didn't want distance between me and this room. I wanted to be here, present, in the same way my mother had always been present. Not loudly, not visibly, but completely. She died 6 weeks ago. Congestive heart failure. She had known it was coming for 14 months and refused to allow it to alter the pace of her days in any way that mattered. She still read every morning. Still had opinions about geopolitics she expressed with the same precision she'd had at 30. Still asked me, every time I called, one specific question before we discussed anything else. What are you working on? Not how are you? Not are you sleeping? What are you working on? Because that was how we spoke to each other. Two people who had organized their lives around the question of what the work required, who understood that the work and the person were not separate things, who never confused busyness with absence or stillness with presence. In the final 3 months when hospice came, I took leave and came home. I sat beside her bed. We talked about cases, hers from decades ago, mine from the year. We talked about the Navy, about the law, about the particular difficulty of holding institutional loyalty and personal conscience in the same hands without one crushing the other. She had opinions about a case I was closing, sharp ones. I wrote 2 of them down. Daniel visited twice during those 3 months. My father, 4 times. I was there every day for 81 days. My mother knew exactly what she was doing when she wrote that will. She was the most precise person I have ever known. She did not make decisions carelessly. She did not leave things ambiguous. She commissioned in 1977 and lived by the same standard until the last week of her life, measuring what things actually were, not what she wished them to be, or feared they'd become. What she left me was not a financial decision. It was a recognition. That was what they couldn't accept. What they had never been able to accept. Not that she left it to me, that she had seen me clearly for my entire life, while they had spent decades looking just past my left shoulder and calling the space between us distance. I uncapped my water bottle, took 1 sip, set it down. Garrett Bloom was standing again, preparing his next question. I picked up my pen. Garrett Bloom had a gift for making the true thing sound suspicious. I had watched it for an hour now. He had a way of pausing just before a key word, access, influence, absence, and letting the pause do the framing. It was skilled work. I gave him that. Ms. Mercer. He turned toward me for the first time that morning, not quite looking at me, addressing the space I occupied. You retired from the United States military. When exactly? 14 months ago, I said. And your retirement income, your pension, could you characterize that as comfortable? I looked at him. Define comfortable. A small hesitation. He hadn't expected that. Sufficient, he said. For your needs. My needs are modest, I said. Yes. And yet? He turned back toward the judge as though sharing something regrettable with a mutual friend. The estate in question represents a considerable sum. The Mercer family home, investment accounts, A property in Maryland valued at $1.4 million. The Honorable Patricia Sohn, Judge, 60s, the particular stillness of someone who has heard every version of every argument, made a small notation on the pad in front of her. I said nothing. Bloom continued. A military career by its nature requires long periods of absence, deployments, assignments, postings that take a service member far from home for months, sometimes years. Yes, I said. Your mother's medical records indicate she was diagnosed 14 months before her death. Yes. And you returned home, took leave, only in the final 3 months. I returned when hospice began, I said, which was when my mother asked me to. That landed. Not dramatically, just accurately. The distinction between those two things is something most people never bother to separate. He shifted. Your brother visited during that period as well. Twice, I said. He ignored that. Ms. Mercer, isn't it true that during those final 3 months you were present for the majority of conversations between your mother and her estate attorney? Not all of them, I said. I was asked to step out twice. But primarily present. Primarily present, yes. And your mother's cognitive state during that period was excellent, I said. Her cardiologist can confirm. Her neurologist can confirm. Her estate attorney, Mr. Hess, can confirm. He is listed as a witness and available to testify today. Bloom paused. This pause had a different quality, not performative, not framing, a recalibration. He moved on. For the next 20 minutes he built a picture, careful, plausible, shaped for a room that had never met my mother. A woman who had swooped into a dying mother's final chapter, who had used proximity as leverage, who had turned a lifetime of absence into one decisive, opportunistic act of presence. It had shape. It had logic. It would work on anyone who hadn't sat beside Grace Mercer for 81 days and watched her read 3 newspapers before 9 in the morning and argue about naval procurement policy from a hospice bed. It had nothing to do with my mother. I wrote 2 more words beneath forward on my legal pad. Then I set the pen down. Looked at the judge. Your Honor, I said. I'd like to cross-examine the previous witness. Bloom turned. Ms. Mercer is self-represented. She isn't technically... A party may cross-examine witnesses who have given testimony relevant to their case. Judge Sohn did not look up from her notes. Ms. Mercer, you may proceed. I stood. My father looked up from the gallery. He had assumed he was finished for the day. His expression shifted, not to fear, to something closer to inconvenience. I walked to the center of the room. 3 questions, written that morning before I'd left the hotel. I always knew exactly how many I needed. Dad. I used that word deliberately. Not Mr. Mercer, not the witness. The word that would make the room understand what this actually was. In the final 14 months of Mom's illness, from diagnosis to the day she passed, how many times did you visit? He shifted in the gallery chair. I visited regularly. How many times? A long pause. Perhaps 12, 15. The hospice visitor log shows 8, I said. Your Honor, I'd like to submit the hospice visitor log as Exhibit C. I had prepared copies. I placed them with the clerk without breaking pace. Second question. In those same 14 months, did Mom ever ask you to come more often? Silence. Dad. She may have mentioned. Yes or no? Yes, he said, quietly. Did she ask me? He looked at the floor. Did she ask me? I said again. Flat. Factual. The same tone I had used in courts-martial when I needed a witness to understand that the question was not going to change shape no matter how long they waited. No, he said. She said you were busy. I let that sit for a moment. Not for effect, because that sentence deserved its own space. Third question. I looked at him. When you testified that I was, quoting from the transcript, not close to her mother, not in any meaningful way, were you describing the relationship you witnessed? Or the relationship you assumed existed in the years you weren't there to witness it? He didn't answer. I waited. The fluorescent light hummed above us. Somewhere behind me, a chair shifted against the floor. My father looked at his hands, then at the wall behind me, then at nothing in particular. No further questions, I said. I walked back to my table and sat down. The afternoon session started with a different energy in the room. Judge Sohn had called a 40-minute recess after the cross-examination. Bloom had used the time to regroup. I could see it in the way he stood when we reconvened. A little less casual, a little more deliberate. Something in his original read of the room had been wrong, and he knew it now, even if he couldn't yet name exactly what. That was the most dangerous phase. The moment a skilled attorney stops performing and starts paying attention. My father did not return to the gallery. I noticed that. I said nothing. Bloom called a financial expert, a forensic accountant retained to characterize the estate distribution as statistically anomalous. The man testified for 22 minutes. He used the word outlier 6 times. His conclusion, a distribution leaving 91% of liquid assets to one child, was, in his professional estimation, inconsistent with the expressed values of a family with 2 adult children. I cross-examined him with 4 questions. Had he reviewed the will? Yes. Did the will include a handwritten addendum? A pause. Yes. Did that addendum specify the rationale for the distribution in the testator's own words? Another pause. Yes. In his professional experience, did a handwritten rationale from a testator with verified cognitive clarity alter the significance of a statistical outlier? He said it was outside his area of expertise. Thank you, I said, and sat down. Bloom stood again. He straightened his jacket once, a small gesture, almost imperceptible, and turned to face the bench. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence the full service record of Ms. Catherine Mercer, obtained through public records request pursuant to this proceeding. Something shifted at the edge of my awareness. Not alarm, attention. I had known this was a possibility. I had decided before the proceeding began, sitting in the hotel room the previous night with the city quiet outside and a cup of coffee going cold on the desk, to let it happen. Whatever he found, I would let him read it aloud. I would not stop him. I would not move. Some things reveal themselves more completely when you simply get out of their way. The clerk accepted the documents. Bloom received his copy. He turned to face the room, the judge, the gallery, the sparse audience of courthouse regulars who drifted in and out of proceedings the way people drift through train stations, present without destination. Ms. Mercer has characterized her military pension as modest, he said. I'd like to establish the full financial picture, salary history, retirement grade, benefits, to contextualize what this estate represents relative to her existing income. He opened to the first page. Catherine Ann Mercer, enlisted, United States Navy, 1994, SA. He read. Pace professional. Deliberate. The voice of a man who had read documents aloud in courtrooms for 30 years and understood that controlled delivery was its own form of argument. I watched him. Page 2, he continued. The expert witness in the gallery had his phone out, scrolling something with his thumb. Daniel had shifted in his chair, one elbow on the table, chin propped on his fist, the posture of a man watching something he believed he had already won. Page 3. Bloom's reading slowed, almost imperceptibly, a half-beat. The kind of adjustment you wouldn't notice unless you had spent decades watching people encounter information they hadn't anticipated. I had spent decades doing exactly that. Page 4. He stopped. Not a pause for effect. Not a rhetorical beat. A full, complete stop. The kind that belongs to a person whose eyes have landed on something that doesn't fit the category they had prepared for it. His eyes moved back across the line. Read it again. Then again. Then he looked up at me. For the first time all day. Really looked. The way you look at something when the frame you built around it has just been removed, and what's left is larger than the frame was. The room had a particular quality of quiet. Not silence. The fluorescent light still hummed. The court reporter's hand still rested on her keys. Someone in the gallery shifted in their seat. But a change in pressure. The kind that arrives before anyone has said a word. The kind that means something has already happened, and the room is only now beginning to understand what. Daniel sat up straighter. The clerk, the same woman who had looked at my sign-in sheet that morning and said nothing, who had handed back my ID without comment and moved to the next item on her desk, had both hands flat on the surface in front of her. She was watching Bloom. Very still. Bloom looked at Judge Sohn, then back at the document. His mouth opened, closed. 30 years of courtrooms had taught me one thing about this exact moment. The moment before everything shifts, when the room is holding its breath without knowing it's holding its breath. Do not fill the silence. Let it complete itself. I did not move. I kept my eyes on a point on the wall approximately 2 feet above Garrett Bloom's left shoulder. My hands were folded on the table. My legal pad was in front of me, the pen beside it. Forward. The clerk stood up. It was a small movement. Just a person rising from a chair. But in a courtroom, bodies at rest means something specific, and a body in motion means something else entirely. Your Honor. Her voice was even, professional, the tone of someone who has interrupted proceedings before and understood the correct register for doing so. I believe counsel may wish to note, for the record, that the service record he is entering into evidence belongs to Rear Admiral Catherine Mercer, United States Navy, retired. The title moved through the room the way a cold front moves. Not dramatically, not with noise, but as a change in pressure that everyone felt simultaneously in their chest. Judge Sohn looked up from her notepad. She looked at me. Not the way she had looked at me for the previous 4 hours. As a self-represented litigant, a woman at a table with a legal pad and a bottle of water she hadn't finished. With a different kind of attention. The kind that recalibrates not just the present moment but everything that preceded it. Every question, every notation, every assumption the room had been operating on since 9 that morning. Admiral Mercer, she said. Yes, Your Honor. A pause. The particular pause of someone choosing their next words with care. I apologize for any confusion in this proceeding. No apology needed, Your Honor, I said. And that was all. Garrett Bloom set the document down on his table. Not dropped. Set. Precisely, with both hands, the way you set something down when you need a moment, and your hands are the only thing you can control. Then he stood very still. Not frozen. Doing the rapid, invisible calculation that experienced attorneys perform when the floor has shifted beneath a case they believed was solid, assessing what remained, what could be salvaged, what had already moved beyond reach. He asked for a brief recess. Judge Sohn granted 5 minutes. In those 5 minutes, I did not move from my chair. I did not check my phone. I did not pour water. I sat and let the room settle around what had just been said, and I thought about my mother. She had pinned my JAG commission insignia herself. It was a Tuesday. It is always a Tuesday, the days that matter. The ceremony was small. Just our unit, a handful of family. My mother arrived in her dress whites. She was a commander at the time, 2 decades still ahead of her before she made vice admiral. She did not make a speech. She did not tell me she was proud, though I knew she was. The way you know things that have never needed to be said, because they have always simply been true. She pinned the insignia, stepped back, looked at me for exactly 3 seconds, Then she said, "Precision and fairness. Together. Don't let the institution separate them." She shook my hand like a colleague, went to find the coffee. That was my mother. That was all of her, in one moment. The warmth that never performed itself. The standard that never lowered. The love that expressed itself as expectation because she believed I could meet it. She was right. I always met it. When the recess ended, Bloom withdrew the financial expert's testimony on the grounds that it had been contextualized by incomplete information. He did not specify what the incomplete information was. The judge did not ask him to. The case did not collapse in a single dramatic instant. That is not how these things work. Not in real courtrooms, not in real proceedings where real people are trying to hold together something they built their certainty on. What happened was quieter and more final. Bloom made 3 more attempts to establish undue influence, each one calibrated now with the new understanding of what he was working against. Each one met with the same stillness from me, a single sentence, or silence, or a question that reframed the premise before he could finish building it. By 3 in the afternoon, Judge Sohn called an adjournment and indicated she would issue a written ruling within 10 business days. Her tone had the specific quality of someone who has already reached a conclusion and is completing the procedural record for the sake of the record. I had used that tone myself, in other rooms, other proceedings. I recognized it the way you recognize a word in a language you grew up speaking. The gallery cleared. The expert witness left without making eye contact with anyone. My father had not returned after the recess. Daniel met me in the hallway. He was alone. No lawyer beside him, no father behind him. Just my brother in a suit that fit him well, standing by a window that looked out over a parking structure, holding his jacket by the collar the way men hold things when they need something to do with their hands and don't know what to do with them. I stopped. I waited. He didn't speak for a moment. I had known Daniel for 43 years, had watched him grow from the boy who followed me through our mother's garden asking questions I didn't always have answers to, into the man standing here now, smaller than I had seen him in a long time. Not smaller in size. In the particular way a person becomes smaller when the story they've been telling themselves has just been publicly, permanently revised. Not rage, not strategy. Something older than both. The specific grief of discovering that the version of someone you carried in your head was never them, that they were living a different life entirely, right beside you, for decades, and never needed you to know it. "You never told us," he said. Finally. "You never asked," I said. He looked at me. Something moved through his face. Not softening exactly. Settling. The way a structure settles when something holding it artificially taut finally releases. "She knew," he said. "About our mother. It wasn't a question." "She knew everything," I said. "She always did." He nodded. Once. Slow. The kind of nod that is not agreement. It is acknowledgement. The difference in my experience is everything. I looked at my brother for a moment. The boy who had been told his whole life that he was the one who stayed, as though staying were the only way to love something, as though the people who leave to serve come back diminished, as though 30 years of courts-martial and overseas postings and Tuesday phone calls with our mother were somehow less than being present for the visible occasions. The holidays, the dinners, the things that photograph well. "Daniel," I said. I was never gone. Then I walked down the hallway toward the exit. The afternoon light through the courthouse windows was the flat gold of late October. The kind that makes everything look simultaneously ordinary and final, like a photograph taken on the last good day before the season changes. My shoes were quiet on the marble floor. The clerk's desk, as I passed it, was empty. She had already gone. I pushed open the door and stepped outside. The air was cold and smelled like wet leaves and exhaust, and the particular cleanness that comes after a city has been rained on and dried again. I stood on the courthouse steps for a moment, not thinking, not processing, just standing in the cold air with the city going about its afternoon around me. Then I walked to my car, started the engine, pulled out of the lot, forward. There is a photograph on my desk at home. My mother and I, the day of my commission. She is in her dress whites. I am in mine. We are not embracing. That was never our way. We are standing side by side, looking at the camera, and we are both carrying ourselves exactly the same way. Weight even, shoulders easy, hands still. 2 officers. One of them just starting. I have looked at that photograph many times over the years, in good years and hard ones, in the years when the work was clarifying and the years when it cost more than I had budgeted for it to cost. I have never once looked at it and felt that I made the wrong choice. Not the choice to enlist, not the choice to commission, not the choice to spend 30 years in courtrooms instead of at dinner tables. My mother left me that estate not because I was present at the end, though I was. Not because Daniel and my father were absent, though they were. She left it to me because of 30 years of Tuesday phone calls, because of a question she asked every single time before we talked about anything else, because she recognized in me the thing she had spent her own life building, the ability to carry something serious without letting it show on your face, to remain precise in rooms that want you to be emotional, to hold the long view when